Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm very excited for this video because this video was voted for by you guys. I asked you guys here on YouTube poll on which video to post and upload next, and you guys voted for this video. You want to know how to memorize vocabulary the best way. So if you want to know, then definitely stay tuned for this video. Alright, let's get right into this subject because I have a couple of tips and points I wanted to talk about in this video, and I don't want this video to be super long. So I'm just going to go ahead with point number 1. If you study vocabulary, you want to make sure that you study first vocabulary that is useful. And that could be any type of vocabulary that will be useful to you in the moment you're learning a new language. So if you're learning business English, for example, or business Spanish, the vocabulary that will be most useful for you, of course, would be the business related words that you would want to learn. But if you're not wanting to learn any type of those business related topics at first, you want to make sure that you learn vocabulary that you're actually gonna use, because there's no point in learning a list of vocabulary that you're not gonna use. It's just gonna be there in the back of your head and you're not gonna use it. That's why I'm emphasizing to make sure that you actually learn vocabulary you know that you're gonna use for sure. But of course, you know the most common words in every language are the same. So you want to learn the words you're going to be able to communicate with in the beginning, of course. And those words are the most common words in every language. So, hi, what's up, what's your name, where you're from, you're going to need anywhere you are. I've met people who've actually studied business Spanish or business English, but they're not able to hold an actual conversation. Like if I would come up to them and ask them like, how are you, what are you doing tomorrow, they're not gonna be able to basically talk to me because all they learned are business related type of vocabulary, and that is where they stop kind of. So you don't want to be in that position where you can't communicate in the language you're learning. Another very important point is to make it simple. Make it as simple as possible. I always want to emphasize that because people think you need tons of amount of vocabulary in order to be able to communicate. But with the most simple type of vocabulary, with just maybe like in the beginning, just a handful of words, you are able to make yourself be understood. It's so essential that you concentrate on useful words you know you're gonna need and use. So here comes the next point. When learning useful words, of course, those useful words are mostly common in real life situations. If you're reading, for example, some kind of fantasy novel or something, there might be words in there that are not useful in everyday life for you. That's why you want to make sure to use words in the beginning that are useful, that you know you're going to use in everyday real life situations, because this is the way you're actually going to retain those words and not forget them. Hence the word useful. And next tip regarding to that is to create an environment where you are immersing yourself. People saying that they can't immerse, you have the internet available. Like you can speak with someone from Japan. You can go on the internet right now, and in half an hour you can get someone from Japan chatting with you. So it is easier than ever to make international contacts. Nowadays you don't have to necessarily travel for you to be able to immerse yourself in a culture, but you can immerse yourself as much as possible by just staying at home. Well, not just staying at home, of course, but within the comfort of like your habitat, your natural habitat. So as I said in another video, you could go out, take classes, you could go out, like go to a local restaurant. If you want to learn, let's say you're learning like Bahasa or something, you go to an Indonesian restaurant, or you are learning Italian, you go to an Italian local restaurant. So you want to make sure you get into that habitat where the language is spoken, and that will help you immerse yourself. So if you can't go out, you can also always like I always say, like immerse yourself through media in that target language. So it could be any media like newspapers, TV shows, music, of course, all those types of media outlets where the language you're learning is spoken. Being surrounded with that will help you immerse yourself in that target language, and that will help you retain vocabulary. Next important point here is, in order to retain vocabulary, you want to make sure that you put every word you're learning into context. Don't just learn a bunch of words out of context that will not relate to you in that moment. You can give me a list of Italian vocabulary that concerns metamorphosis, and I will not be able to return that because that does not concern me right now and here. And I'm not going to be able to put it into context unless I myself make the effort to put it into context where I will remember that vocabulary. But other than that, if you just learn random words just like that and you do not put them into context, it is way more difficult to retain that vocabulary. So what you're doing with immersion basically is you're putting the words you're learning into context. What you're doing by applying them also in real life situations is the same. It is putting the words into context because you're otherwise not going to retain it, or just for a short period amount of time, but not in the longer run. So this leads me to the next point. Instead of going through a random list of vocabulary flashcards, which to me makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, like even in school, I hated vocabulary flashcards because flashcards to me is just the epitome of not acquiring the words you're actually learning, but just like putting them in your short time memory, and for a test that is going to come up, and that's it. Like you're going to forget those words you're learning afterwards because you're not putting them into context. And that is what I never did. Like just studying flashcards, to me, for some people in my work, but for me that is absolutely the worst. So that is why it's so important to put the vocabulary into context. That's how you're going to memorize it the best way. As I mentioned in this video of how to learn a language at home, anything you do could be related to that language. I mean by that you put the language into context. So it's up to you to actually, for example, go out and label the items in your house. So every time you use, for example, those kitchen appliances or utensils, you will know and remember them because you are actually using the vocabulary you're learning and you're putting it into context. And that is why it will be way easier for you to retain them. This leads me to another point, which is to make the vocabulary interactive. So it's not just a list of dead words that you're not using, but it is actually something you are going to make alive by applying it. And when I mean applying it, I mean you are going to put everything into context, and that is what makes you, again, retain the vocabulary. That is the difference between just learning a bunch of vocabulary and random words for a test, or actually acquiring those words for you to remember them for the long run. Next tip to better memorize vocabulary is to actually use memorization techniques. So everyone has different kind of techniques which works best for them. I know that me picturing the vocabulary around, for example, if I'm learning the household items, and me picturing, like literally closing my eyes and picturing how I go around the house and have the different items and I speak the names out loud, that helps me to actually retain the words. This is something that helped me learn vocabulary, but of course you could have different techniques that help you. I know something that also helps me is listening. So I know that by listening to songs, personally, I memorize a lot of vocabulary. That's why I'm always emphasizing on listening to songs, because that helped me tremendously memorize vocabulary. By listening to songs, the vocabulary is already put into context for you. And the last but definitely not least tip on how to memorize vocabulary is to speak it out loud, to repeat it out loud. And I always emphasize that the repetition is key. It is very important that you speak out loud and not just interiorize vocabulary by just going over it in your head, but speak it out loud. I know a lot of people don't do that. They just kind of interiorize the vocabulary. It is very important that you actually speak out loud and repeat the words you're wanting to learn instead of just internalizing them in your head. Because when you repeat them out loud, you're doing the same thing. You're putting the word into context and you're using the word. You're speaking and listening to yourself at the same time. That is what makes you memorize words way easier and faster than just internalizing them in your head. I could just go through a list of vocabulary and just go through them in my head. I'll be able to remember them in my short-term memory. But just with learning something by heart, the action of actually speaking out loud will help you a lot in retaining that vocabulary. So those were the tips. I hope you guys liked them. Those were just a couple of brief tips I used myself, and that helped me a lot. So I'm convinced that they will help some of you out there. Of course, everybody has their different methods, but those were the most useful methods for me personally, and that is why I want to share them with you. So I thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.